Well, good evening and Shana Tova. No. Shana Tova. Okay, all right. It is so good to see you, and it is so good to be here in person with you this evening on this holiest evening of the Jewish year. Introducing her Rosh Hashanah sermon just a few days ago, Rabbi Sue Shankman-Namath, the recently appointed senior rabbi of Washington Hebrew congregation, told the story of a woman who entered what presumably was her son's room to find her son in bed and to say to him, "It's time to get up, get yourself together, you need to go to temple." To which her son responded saying, "Oh, I don't want to go, not today. I just can't. I'm too tired. It's just a story." So the mother said more firmly this time, "Okay, get up, get yourself together. There isn't much time. You need to get going. You need to go to temple." This exchange continued, and the son defiantly eventually said, "No, I am not going. I'm tired," and pulled the covers over his head. And so mother came over, pulled the covers back, and said, "You get up right now, get yourself together, and go to temple." And there followed this moment of tense silence, to be followed then by this resentful, "Why?" So she said, "I will give you 2 reasons. One, you're 53 years old. And 2, you're the rabbi." I'm listening to this on Rosh Hashanah. I'm lying in bed with COVID. I happen to be 53 years old. And I happen to be a rabbi. And I'm watching this with disbelief. And really from that moment onward, could not help thinking how much I would have loved to be here with you. Right here on Rosh Hashanah, on this pulpit, how much I love being here in this historic, in extraordinarily spiritual place. How much I love being here every time I enter this space. I remember well the first time I saw this sanctuary. I remember well the people who led me into this sanctuary and who accompanied me. I am forever indebted to them. I remember my feelings then, the sense of being overtaken, the emotional experience, this combination of awe, of gratitude, of appreciation and excitement. And it has never left me. There has never been a single occasion where I did not want to be here. I remember coming for the first time onto this bima. I am so happy to be with you here today. Thank you for being here with me. And like many others who experienced COVID-19, I knew, I hoped, I anticipated, I prayed, I planned to be here with you this evening and tomorrow. and to be able to express how fortunate I feel and how fortunate I think we all are to be here. Which led me to thinking about the big question Rabbi Shankman Namath asked in her story: why? And my mind turned to others who have really suffered, not just with a passing virus, but others who really could not make it to temple or to synagogue, not just because of a temporary setback. And my mind turned to a place I do not know. 80 years ago, my mother was 6 years old, at that time in hiding with her maternal family in a village south of Brussels, in Belgium. By this time, the family had experienced 3 seasons living in that place, in a stable. No electricity, no running water, no windows, a barn door. There was a well with a manual pump outside the stable. It used to freeze in the winter. My mother's family was hidden by good, courageous people who were affiliated with the Belgian resistance to the Nazis. The neighbors participated in this effort too. My maternal grandfather, my mother's maternal grandfather, Nathan, or in the Yiddish pronunciation, Nussen, after whom I am named, was a devout traditional Jew. He kept kosher, always, including on Passover, and not only at peacetime, also during the war. The little I know about his life suggests that he was a dignified, modest, wise man and kind to others. He would pray every day, putting on his talis and tefillin wherever he was. My mother remembers him praying outside the stable. Every now and again, the landlords or neighbors would come over and warn him that they had guests coming over, including Nazi officers, not to come out and pray. There was no Kol Nidre at temple or in synagogue in 1942. Not for them, not for so many others. This small family was hunted, sheltered, teetering on the verge of the abyss. They were lucky to be alive. And what a difference 2 years made in their lives. In early September 1944, the family was liberated by advancing American troops. So around this time, 78 years ago, in late September 1944, my mother remembers going to the Great Synagogue of Brussels with her grandfather, hand in hand, with him carrying the talis bag openly in the street. I have been trying to imagine what this must have felt like. And I've been thinking about others who would or could not go to temple, especially during this High Holy Day season, or perhaps who just would not. Some who would perhaps rather not identify as Jews in public or just remain low-key. Some who might just celebrate with family or friends at home, do more, do less. This year I've been thinking especially about some of our Jewish students across so many campuses here in this country. I've been thinking about the Jewish students in Berkeley who saw their university campus make the headlines because at the law school, a student group called Students for Justice in Palestine passed a resolution banning Zionist or pro-Israel speakers and participants in order to create a safe space from oppression, and then encouraged other student groups to do the same. Now, the university reacted very appropriately and dealt with it, and I do not wish to exaggerate the real-life implications of this for Jewish students, but I'm thinking about how some of those Jewish students may have experienced discomfort. Or the Jewish students at the University of Denver, who started the school year arriving right for the start of their college experience, or perhaps returned to school, as Professor Hashemi, the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies, suggested that it was perhaps the Mossad, Israel's secret service agents, who were behind the attack on Salman Rushdie at Chautauqua this last August, opining that perhaps Mossad operatives lured the attacker to violence against Rushdie, pretending that they were representing the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. In other words, that the stabbing of Salman Rushdie was Israel's fault, a nefarious plot to make Iran and its allies look bad. Or the Jewish students who walked onto campus on the first day at the University of Wisconsin in Madison to find anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic messages scrawled in chalk on sidewalks and paths throughout the campus, throughout the different corners of the campus, with messages wherein some Jewish groups were described, and I quote, as racist, genocidal, having blood on their hands. Or perhaps the Jewish students at the University of Vermont, who at the start of the school year were reminded of a teaching assistant who threatened to assign lower grades to students who had visited Israel, or who would discover that a couple of student groups wished also to bar pro-Israeli or Zionist students, yet again in order to create a feeling of safety among others. By the way, one of these students' groups was a sexual assault support group. Or those students in Vermont who witnessed or experienced a bizarre incident of a Hillel building being pelted with pebbles. One of the reports I read suggested this lasted approximately 40 minutes. According to another account, a student asked the stone thrower to stop, and he responded saying, "Are you a Jew?" And I could go on sharing other examples from other campuses across the country. Recent studies suggest that approximately 30% of Jewish students in this country have experienced animosity, have known about one or more incidents on their campus, or felt uncomfortable identifying as Jews in public settings on college campuses. According to a Brandeis study published last year, 70% of Jewish students in certain Jewish fraternities and sororities were personally aware or had experience of anti-Semitism on their campus. Jewish students hiding their Stars of David under their shirts, or thinking twice about entering into a Hillel building in America in 2022. Experiences that we would condemn and warn about in Western Europe throughout the past decades, and that during the last few years insinuated themselves increasingly becoming regular aspects of our lives here in America. Anti-Semitism is continuing its advance in North America. It's continuing its return. How many of our students decided not to attend High Holy Day services? How many would have chosen to pull the covers over their heads? How many might have thought to themselves resentfully, why? Almost exactly 120 years ago, Rabbi Moses Gries spoke to the Temple-Tifereth Israel community at their congregational home on 55th Street. He titled his sermon, "Shall We Remain Jews?" Gries started out explaining the backdrop to this question as he saw it at the time: anti-Semitism. Now, I must emphasize that anti-Semitism in America in late 2022 is nothing like the lived experience of Jews in this country in the autumn of 1902. Of course, the situation now is completely different. Yet Greece delivered a visionary sermon that has been a source of inspiration for me throughout the past decade. To begin, he described two experiences of anti-Semitism. One that was overwhelmingly powerful, pervasive, and unavoidable, and another that was sinister and hurtful, but seemed escapable, that seemed to allow a way out. Speaking of the first and being the first rabbi I know of to openly speak of the emerging racial anti-Semitism of the late 19th and early 20th century, he said, "I know the common opinion of the Jew and non-Jew. Once a Jew, always a Jew. The Jew believes it because they think there is a certain feeling born in us which holds us forever to the race. Non-Jews believe it because they think the Jews are peculiar, not in the sense of chosen, but peculiar in racial characterization, which cannot be destroyed. In other words, there is no way out." Greece understood that this kind of pervasive anti-Semitism, an anti-Semitism that gives rise to a dead-end kind of despondency, often promoted and managed by the state, this kind of anti-Semitism would cause Jews to be identified, discriminated against, vilified, and likely to feel Jewish, both in terms of their personal experiences and their oppressed solidarity with co-religionists. In a perverse way, this kind of powerful, systemic anti-Semitism, the social construct that would impose itself on everyone, separate Jews from others, and allow Jews no place to hide, served to preserve Judaism in its misery, even among the less religiously inclined. Greece wrote of our ancestors, "It has been a burden to be a Jew. It has been a hindrance. Genius was born of Israel and lived and died unknown, unhonored. They longed to be in the world, to rule, to lead, to inspire humankind. They could not. They were Jews. A work needed to be done, and they had the power and the genius to do it. It was not permitted them. They were Jews, children of a despised race. Had Greece only known what my mother and her family would undergo, what horror millions of Jewish families and individuals would experience within 50 years of these words being written, of course he could not have imagined. This was the kind of anti-Semitism we had witnessed throughout our history. We paid a terrible price for it. We saw its ugly manifestation most recently in the Soviet Union, until its disintegration. On the other hand, non-systemic, occasional, cultural anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that was not state-sponsored, anti-Semitism that might have been tacitly tolerated, or that might even have been frowned upon by the state. This was the kind of anti-Semitism that might be escapable, that seemed to offer an exit. Sinister and nefarious, unseen and unfelt, until it made its hateful appearance. It would undermine Jewish identity, encourage Jews to hide, try to evade identification, to disappear into the rest of the world. Greece understood this was the anti-Semitism of the New West and of America. And this leading American-born rabbi of our congregation, the first American-born rabbi to ever lead the Central Conference of American Rabbis, knew something about America. Here, every Jew was a Jew by choice. But nevertheless, in the early 20th century, in America, there was still a strong feeling that remained from the trauma of the old, powerful, all-pervasive anti-Semitism. Again, to quote Greece, the sympathy of fellow suffering, the strong bond of common misery, the allegiance for resistance against a common foe. In other words, in spite of us being in America, Greece detected a solidarity that might be strong enough to hold us together, at least momentarily. Even here, there was hope that along with a temptation to escape, to flee, the Jewish heart would call for a return, for fidelity to one's own, for the comfort of the familiar and authentic. Yet, and herein we find a glimmer of the genius of Moses' Greece. In the face of this centripetal Jewish sentiment, this force pulling us all back together toward Jewish identity and narrative, away from the oppressive world around us, Greece stood and argued for a new approach. I plead for liberty, that the Jew need not remain a Jew. I plead that the world compel us not forever to be shut into ourselves. If there be Jews who would not remain, I hope they be granted fullest freedom to be what they would. If they wish not to remain Jews, let them out from our midst and no longer be counted of us, he said. There have been and there are those in every community who have wished and wish that we and the world will let them be other than they are. They sorrow because Israel has set its seal upon their faces. They grieve because they cannot emancipate themselves. They would rejoice to look un-Jewish and sink their Jewish nature deep within their breasts and obliterate every feature, manner, peculiarity, sign that might in any wise betray the Jew. For such as those, I plead. And he was not blind. Greece knew that once you offered people permission to leave, once you said you understood, once you cracked open the door would never shut again. Today, he said, there is a like temptation in Europe and here. The way to power and advancement and public honor is still difficult for the Jew. There are those who feel weighted, burdened, dragged down and held down by this name of Jew. Gladly and with light heart, they would surrender a religion they love none too well to win for themselves new honor, new glory, new power, full opportunity, full equality, full freedom. Hence the question he posed 120 years ago. Will we remain Jews? And we in turn may ask ourselves, is this where we are heading now? Is this also 21st century America? Back to the future? Will our children and grandchildren remain Jews? And if so, why? Why get out of bed to go to temple? What is it that would truly bind us together? Are we and are they destined to hold on to a Judaism in ever-increasing defiance and protest of others around us? Is this the Judaism we wish for ourselves? Is this the tradition and identity we will bequeath to future generations? Is this our fate? Moses' Greece knew the answer and offered us yet another glimmer of his genius. We must do more, he wrote. Judaism had a positive doctrine to teach. Let us proclaim Judaism, the religion of the prophets, he said. Let the word hear that it must stand upon justice, and that this is Jewish. Let all the nations know that a right world, a right humankind, a right life rests upon God and righteousness, and that this is Jewish. We are Jews and we would remain Jews. We must and will prove that we will remain Jews and yet be of the noblest of the earth. Not yet be noble, nay, not in spite of, noble because of being Jews, he said. Greece knew we were called to plead for liberty for us and for all, to open our doors and to overcome our fears, to speak to our community and to our neighbors, to the world, the universal message of our faith. Greece knew that we must speak for compassion, equality, and justice. We can and must unleash the genius and the skill, the art and creativity, the learning and the savvy, the human treasure in our midst for the sake of repair and the spread of goodness. This is how we fight anti-Semitism and its implications. In the face of racial anti-Semitism, we must be anti-racist. In the face of religious anti-Semitism, we must fight for religious freedom. In the face of cultural anti-Semitism, we must stand for diversity, inclusion, and the embrace of the other. In the face of national anti-Semitism, we must stand for the right to self-determination, for the safe and well-being of all peoples, and our people and the state of Israel. And we can. Further, let us truly heed the words of the prophet. Limdu heitev, dirshu mishpat, ashru chamotz, shiftu yatom, rivu almana. Learn to do good. Devote yourselves to justice. Aid the wronged. Uphold the rights of the orphan, argue the cause of the widow, in the words of Isaiah. We must internalize, demonstrate, and teach. This is the essence and core of who we are as Jews. We need each other, and the world needs us, Jews. As Greece called upon us to do 120 years ago, now is our time to speak and act on behalf of both ourselves and of others, to make plain the authenticity and the relevance of our age-old message to our children, to the greater community, to our country, and to the world. And we can only do this together. We must get our children out of bed. We must get them out of bed and onto temple. Pulling the covers over our heads may feel good right now, but will not benefit us tomorrow or the day after. The future of Judaism is in our hands. Tomorrow, it will be in the hands of our children. Shall we remain Jews? Let us be Jews. May this be God's will. Amen.